Today I'm sharing what I read in April. Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. I was able to read 9 books in April, and that was pretty good, except it was a lot less than I was expecting to. So I tried to take part in 2 readathons in April. One was the Christian fiction readathon that Katie at Paperbacks and Ponytails was putting on. And that one I didn't finish. I read a couple of books that counted toward it, but I didn't finish all of the prompts that I wanted to. And so that is going to come into play for my May TBR. I am going to extend the books that I wanted to read for that readathon into May, but I'll talk about that later in my May TBR video. The other readathon I was taking part in was Alcott April, but because I was doubling up on 2 of the prompts, I only had 4 books I needed to read for this, and they were pretty small books. And then there was also watching the adaptation as a group. And so I was able to finish all of the prompts in Alcott April, so I'm going to go through those first. First, there was the group read, The Inheritance, by Louisa May Alcott. I'm going to read part of the back for the synopsis for this. It's a tale of Edith, who is an impoverished Italian orphan who innocently wields the charms of virtue, beauty, and loyalty to win her true birthright. A long-lost letter reveals her secret inheritance, nothing less than the English estate on which she is paid companion. But Edith is loath to claim it. Far more important to her by far are the respect and affection of her wealthy patrons and the love of a newfound friend. I was surprised that I'd never read this book before, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. She wrote this when she was 17 years old, and I think that does come across because it is really dramatic. It takes the sweetness from maybe Little Women and other things like that and really dials it up. I read it really quickly and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun reading this. I also was able to watch the adaptation with the group, and that was really fun. I actually really liked the movie. There were things I liked better in the book, but there were also things I liked better in the adaptation. And I wanted to do the group discussion on it, and I jumped in for a few minutes, but then I had to jump off because we were doing family things that night. But I am going to go back and watch that because I really want to see what everybody else thought of this book. I really enjoyed it. For the nonfiction book about Louisa, I reread Childhood of Famous Americans book about Louisa May Alcott. It's called Young Novelist. These books are just very simple introductions to people's lives. And I read this quite a few years ago. I think it was our very first year of homeschooling that I read this with my daughters. And I remember enjoying it then, so I wanted to read it again. I'm glad I did because there were some things that I had or forgotten about that I felt like I was reading for the first time. So that was kind of strange. I think it's a good, thorough biography for if you don't want to know every single detail, and you don't have to know everything. But I do think it gives a really good overview of her life, and I enjoyed reading this too. And this also was a very quick read. I was able to read this in just one day. The prompts that I doubled up on were the books by somebody that inspired Louisa May Alcott and a book by her neighbor. And I used the illustrated Walden, or Life in the Woods, by Henry David Thoreau for this. This was a really beautiful copy that I got at Barnes & Noble. Throughout the whole book, it has paintings and illustrations. This I read a little bit at a time throughout the whole month. And this was a hard one to rate for me because there were times when this was maybe 3 stars and then other times when it was 5 stars. There were times when I got a little bit bored and didn't really care as much about what he was sharing. And then all of a sudden there would be a sentence or a paragraph that would just leave me thinking for the rest of the day about it. And I shared some of the quotes and paragraphs that did that to me with my husband, and he said the same thing. Like, he would be thinking about them and he hadn't even read the book. It wasn't predictable. I couldn't just, skim until the next really good part. It was sprinkled within. He could be talking about how much his beans that he was planting cost him, and then the next sentence was going to be a really thought-provoking look at poverty or look at the way that people live life. So it was a really good read. I'm really glad I read it. And this is definitely one I will revisit. Some of the quotes that I wrote down that really made me think were ones like this. Why should men be digging their graves as soon as they are born? Making themselves sick so that they may lay up something against a sick day. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. The head monkey in Paris puts on a traveler's cap, and all the monkeys in America do the same. In the long run, men hit only what they aim at. Therefore, though they should fail immediately, they had better aim at something high. I would rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion. I think that speaks to a lot of us introverts. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to the one who is striking at the root. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And there was an entire paragraph on about how men would wake up and immediately read the newspaper, and they just couldn't wait to get the news of the day or what's going on in the world. And he even said that he felt like he could ring the bell for the fire alarm and everyone would come, but not everybody would be coming to help put out the fire. A lot of them would be coming just to watch it burn. And that made me think of how would Thoreau look at today's world, where we all have our phones and we're constantly looking at news of the world everywhere, even things that don't affect us. I think it's good to be dialed into what's happening in the world, and even into the people that you care about, or the people that you want to support and you want to have support you. But there is something definitely to think about of how quickly we get on our social media, how quickly we run to find out what's happening to everyone. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about that he addressed even back in this day. In one part, he said, "It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves." And he went on to talk about how paths from others influence our path. So his path that he had from his cabin to the pond, the others would use that later. And that got me thinking for quite a long time about how, with my faith transition, a lot of the people I've talked to that have had this same transition as I have, we all have this same level of guilt of how we have left the path our ancestors tread. And actually, that's a good thing. And so sometimes the paths tread by others are good for us, and sometimes they're not. And it's very important to know the difference and not just fall into the rut and stay there. And then two other ones that I'll share that I really loved. One of them says, "Why should we be in such a desperate haste to succeed and in such desperate enterprises? If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears." That made me wonder, and I still haven't looked it up. When people say they go to the beat of their own drummer, is that from this, or did he also use that thought? I don't know. And then the last one I wrote down, "Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth." So as you can see, there were a lot of nuggets. That's only part of them. And so I think it's a really worthwhile book to read and to really think about. And I would definitely recommend doing it the way I did it. Either reading it slowly and having it be all you read, or reading it in little bites throughout a certain amount of time while you're reading other things, so that you can keep going back to it refreshed and not try to rush through it. And then the last prompt for that readathon was to read a short story by Louisa. I got this book, Behind a Mask, that is a short story collection by her, and I planned on trying to read the whole book, and I thought if I couldn't, then I would just read one or two short stories from it. But it was actually a pretty quick read with it being short stories, and I was able to get through the whole book. So I had mixed emotions on these as well. There were some that I liked better than others. The very first one was Obtaining Supplies, and it was about a girl going into nursing. I thought that one was pretty boring. I really didn't care much about what I was reading. Might have been the mood I was in, I don't know, but I wasn't that into it. The second one was called My Contraband. So that was a nurse that was assigned to a rebel soldier in this hospital, basically because nobody else would want to take care of him. And she had a young man that had been a slave that they called Contraband, and he was her helper. And it turns out that he has a connection to this soldier that they're taking care of. It was sad, but it was interesting. So I did enjoy my reading of that one. The next one was Pauline's Passion and Punishment. This was very dramatic. It reminded me a lot of The Inheritance, except the opposite kind of people. They weren't wholesome. And it felt very different than anything I've ever read by Louisa May Alcott. I didn't really enjoy it, but I was interested in it. I was very surprised by how it ended, and I really didn't like the ending. But it definitely was an interesting experience to read that. The next one was Behind a Mask, and that is the longest short story in the book. Let me see if I can get to the end of it here. Yeah, it was this much of the book is Behind a Mask. So I read that over a couple of days, and in this one is a girl is coming to this home to be a governess or a companion to the young daughter. And she comes in and she seems perfect and sweet and wonderful. But there's something there, something is wrong. And then when she goes to her room at night, she takes off the fake hair and the fake teeth. She's not even the age that she's pretending to be. And so at that point, okay, something is going on. She is here for a reason. And so the whole story is finding that out. Why is she here? What is her purpose? What is her mission? It did not end the way I thought it was going to, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that was such a good short story and very interesting Very different again from what you normally read from her, but I really enjoyed it. The next one was really short, like 2 pages, called Happy Women. And it was just basically showing these 4 different women that didn't get married and have children and what they did instead and how they were happy with their lives. So that was an interesting little picture into what a woman could do back then that didn't have to be the norm. And then the last one was How I Went Out to Service. And this was an autobiographical tell of something that had happened to her where she worked really hard for a family that she went out to service to and was only paid a very small amount. And I already knew that story from the biography. So it was interesting to read it in her words. So I would recommend this. I am planning to read more short stories by her in the future. And I'm really glad I did get to all of them. As far as the books that I was able to read for the Christian Fiction Readathon, I read The Blythes Are Quoted by Louisa May Alcott. I read that for a book with a married couple. I read Set in Stone by Kimberly Woodhouse for the mother-child relationship. I was going to do something different, but then I changed it to that. Then I read The Metropolitan Affair by Jocelyn Green. I read this one for the character who is heartless / a villain. And then I also counted The Inheritance by Louisa May Alcott for the character who is wealthy or in society. So I will get back to all of those in a minute, but those are the 4 that I counted for that. As far as the challenges that are my monthly challenges go, for the Read Your Bookshelf challenge, the Maud and the Doyle side both had the same prompt for April, which was a main character that has red hair. And I mentioned that I really wanted to get to The Blythes Are Quoted by Louisa May Alcott, and I got this for my birthday at the very beginning of the month. I think I talked about it in either my birthday haul or my TBR. This is my original copy from when I was growing up, obviously very ripped, The Road to Yesterday. So this is what was published. So Louisa May Montgomery got this delivered to the publisher the day she died, and then this is what they published. So apparently they thought that this was too dark and they just didn't think the public would like it, I guess. The weird thing about that is as I went through it, I kind of compared them, and there was only one short story in Blythes Are Quoted that wasn't in Road to Yesterday. I thought there were going to be quite a few. What wasn't in Blythes Are Quoted is the poetry and the little pictures of the Blythe family sitting around reading poetry together in between each short story. And so those were not in it. And those, I think, are what kind of connected all of the stories and moved them along from World War I up to World War II. And so I think that this really suffered from not having those in it. I didn't love all of the poetry because I'm not the hugest poetry lover. But some of it was really good, and just their thoughts that they talked about afterward kind of let you know what was going on at the time with the Blythe family or where their personalities were. You see kind of Anne's melancholy after losing her son in the war. And so I definitely feel like it suffered from not having those. From the one short story that wasn't in it, I don't really think it missed out that much. It was okay, but it wasn't. But my favorite short stories were actually ones that were already in this one. The great thing is that it had been so long since I read Road to Yesterday that I didn't remember most of them. And so I did, while I would remember little parts, I didn't remember the stories as a whole. And so it did feel fresh to me. I also have heard that some of them were shortened or changed for the Road to Yesterday, which could be true. I didn't feel like going through and comparing them that way, so I did not do that. But I definitely recommend this over Road to Yesterday. The first half of the book deals with life before the First World War, and then the second part deals with it after World War I, in between it and World War II, and you're kind of getting to the very beginnings of World War II at the end. So it starts with a poem called The Piper that is about war, and then there's a short story called Some Fools and a Saint, and that is the one that wasn't in the original. It was kind of a spooky story. There's a house that is haunted. They need to figure out what's going on. Is it really haunted, or is somebody doing all of these tricks? It was a really long one. It might have been the longest one in the book. Or if it's not, it's in the running for it. And I did enjoy it. I did figure out what the mystery was before it was revealed, but it was enjoyable. Like I said, I don't think that you would miss out by not reading it. But it was fun to read something by her that I had never read before. I won't go through every single short story in that book like I did with the Louisa May Alcott one, because there are quite a few short stories in this one. There's a lot more than there were in the other one. But the ones that were my favorite were The Twins Pretend, that was a boy and a girl that were down at the beach, and they're very bored, and a man comes along and he's bored too, and he's a very rich man. He's come back to the island to rest, and he's just thinking of leaving because he's not having fun. He stops to talk to the children, and through that conversation, it gives them a project to work on together. And that one I really loved. There was also one called The Cheated Child, and in that one, the boy is an orphan, and he has a lot of money that he's going to inherit, and he has to choose which family member to go live with. And most of them want him just for his money. That walks you through each stay at the different families' homes, and that one was really good. And then the last one was Brother Beware, where the brother thinks that his brother is going to be proposing to this woman, and he doesn't want him to. And so he kidnaps her. And I thought that one was really kind of funny, and it didn't end the way I expected it to. So I really enjoyed that one. The one thing that I thought was kind of funny is in one of the stories, the one that they got the title for the original from, it's The Road to Yesterday. There's a part where the character says, "Besides, it isn't half an hour since I met you, and it's years. We're second cousins, aren't we? And old enemies." And I thought that was really funny because it seems like Lucy May Montgomery is the person that maybe invented the word frenemies. For the Read Around the World-a-thon this month, it was a book you would take on vacation. So I just chose Set in Stone for that. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. For the Buzzword-a-thon for April, it was nature. So I used Walden for that. Unfortunately, I didn't read any Sherlock Holmes or books for my literature course in April. For Emma at the Bookish Princesses Book Club for April, we were reading The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis. And so I was able to read this. This I also did the same way I did Walden, where I read a little bit every morning, and just finished the day of the group discussion. This was one of those books that I wasn't sure how much I liked it. And then doing the discussion, hearing other people's thoughts, it made me like it a little bit more. I enjoyed it. I think it was good. I did not like it as much as Pilgrim's Progress. I think that he took so much from Pilgrim's Progress for this. It is definitely based on that. But while there were a lot of nuggets in it and a lot of really good things, especially after the discussion, I had a lot more of those in my mind. I don't think it was done as well as Pilgrim's Progress. Maybe that's because I've been reading Pilgrim's Progress for 15 years and I'm more familiar with it. But yeah, I would say that if you're really interested, if you really like C.S. Lewis and you really love Pilgrim's Progress, maybe read this and compare them. But I wouldn't say it's one that everybody needs to read. So back to the 3 books I haven't talked about a lot yet. The first book I read in April was The Metropolitan Affair by Jocelyn Green. And this is the story of a woman who works at the Met Museum, and she's over the Egyptian things. She's I think the second, the assistant to the curator, but the curator's gone. And so she's in that leadership role. And a man from her past is a police officer. He's been working with the other police officers to shut down the speakeasies during Prohibition. And he wants to kind of switch that to finding people that are making fake Egyptian artifacts and selling them to the wealthy people, because everybody has Egypt fever right then. Her father, who would go to Egypt and dig and find things, she always wanted to go with him, and he has now asked her to be involved in his business. And so she's kind of trying to figure out what to do. I did figure out who the villain in this story was very early on, but I was not sure that I was right. Because I love archaeology and all of that so much, I expected it to be one of my favorites of the year. I feel like there were parts of this book where it was and parts where it wasn't. At one part, there is all of a sudden a lot of faith content, and I didn't feel like it was sprinkled throughout the book enough that made sense, because it kind of fell out of nowhere. I think it was meant to feel that way, but it did feel a little bit too much that way for me. And there were parts of the book that went a lot slower than other parts. But overall, I still really enjoyed the book and the story, and I thought it was a very interesting twist, and I really liked the characters. Even a few of the side characters I really enjoyed. So I still recommend this. You need to go in knowing it's going to be a little bit slow. In contrast to that, Set in Stone by Kimberly Woodhouse, I loved. This was my favorite book of the month. And I spoke about the first book in this series in January when I read it, and said how I was so excited to read it because it's about paleontology and it's supposed to be taking place during the Bone Wars. But the first book didn't really feel like it had that much in it. That felt kind of like a background, like that was just in the background of the main story. This was what I wanted with the first book. Even though you're dealing with other things besides just the paleontology still felt like it was in the forefront of the story the whole time. And the main characters went to lectures about things that people were talking about at this time that had to do with paleontology and dinosaurs. And I really liked the two main characters, the male and the female. I loved both of them. I loved the faith content in this. She is really good at making it feel pretty natural. I mean, if you were not a faithful person, if you were not a Christian, I don't think you would enjoy it. I think it would be too much for people who don't want any or want very little amount of faith. But if you love having faith content in your books, but you want it to feel natural, I think this one did that really well. In this, there's also a villain, and I did also choose that one right, but I thought I was wrong the whole time. I just felt like it was one person, but I thought I was wrong, and I was correct. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my reading of this book. I highly, highly recommend this one, and you don't have to have read the first one to read this one. And the last book I finished in April was Introducing Christianity to Mormons by Eric Johnson. This goes through a bunch of the different things that are different between Mormonism theology and Christianity. He gives examples of how he spoke with different Mormons about these things and how you can, and it shows the difference between the two. I don't think that this would go over very well if you bought this for a Mormon and gave it to them. I don't think when I was a Mormon that I would have appreciated it, but I think it's good for someone who is leaving or questioning Mormonism. So if you know someone who is asking you questions or is talking as if they are thinking about maybe leaving or that they don't know if they believe in it anymore, I think this would be a perfect book for that. It would have been really helpful in my transition. And it also was still helpful to me to really break down some of the differences and things that maybe I still don't understand fully. I think it also helps you to really see the core of the differences so that if you are having a conversation with somebody who is Mormon, that you will be better equipped of what to say. Sometimes it's really hard to verbalize the differences and why there is a difference, because Mormons want to believe they are the same as every other Christian and just have extra special stuff. And that is how I felt. I was really offended when people said I wasn't a Christian when I was a Mormon. And this really breaks it down why it's different so that it is easier to share that without being offensive. So yeah, I think it's a really good book. I think he did a great job giving you the tools for those conversations if you're ever in that situation. So that's it. I'm hoping to read a lot more books in May, but I'm very happy with what I was able to read. I feel like I read a lot of good books. Nothing fell under 3.5 stars. Introducing Christianity to Mormons was my highest rating because I just felt like everything in it was so well done. But like I said, Set in Stone was my favorite of the month. Let me know what your favorite book was that you read in April.